He shattered the drugstore window with his elbow, glass slicing through the threadbare sleeve of his army coat, blood dripping onto the bottles of children's fever medicine that clattered to the floor. He wasn't stealing because he was hungry. Walter Grady, a black veteran who once wore the Bronze Star on his chest, now clutched cans of powdered milk and a bottle of Tylenol like they were rations for a battlefield. And in a way they were, because a 3-year-old girl, feverish, abandoned, half-breathing inside a cardboard box by a dumpster, was waiting for him in the cold. He ran into the rain like it was mortar fire. He didn't get far. A squad car caught up to him near 3rd and Bramble. He was tackled to the pavement. Handcuffs bit into wrists once trained to carry wounded men across live zones. "Assaulting an officer!" the police shouted. No one asked what he was carrying. No one cared that he'd once saved lives in Fallujah. No one remembered that he had a name. All they saw was this: Walter Grady, homeless, black, suspect. The winter wind of San Jose slides like a knife through the alleyways, dull enough not to pierce, but cold enough to make dignity flinch. On the sidewalks where old gum and oil stains mark time more than clocks do, a man pushes a battered shopping cart lined with dry cardboard and covered with a tarp. To most, it's junk. To Walter, it's all that keeps the glass bottles from rattling too loud and waking ghosts. Each night, he loops the city like a postman with no address. His name used to mean something. Walter Grady, U.S. Marine, evacuation team leader. 2 tours in Mosul, 1 in Fallujah, Bronze Star, call sign Muleback, because he never left a man behind. Now his beard hangs silver and low, brushing the collar of a coat that once fit tighter across broader shoulders. His eyes no longer scan. They settle on aluminum cans, on bins half filled with regret, on survival. He was once a husband. Margaret had been his anchor, Army nurse. She tied her hair in the field with medical gauze and stitched bullet wounds with fingers steadier than hope. They met at a field hospital in Ramstein, fell in love in a war zone, married between rotations, and came home with a dream that sounded simple: slow down, plant things, stay close to the VA hospital, and just in case. But just in case came too late. She had abdominal pain. The VA called it indigestion, no scans, no follow-ups. 3 months later, she collapsed in the kitchen. Stage 4 ovarian cancer, terminal. Walter sat by her bedside every day for 7 weeks. He didn't cry. He held her hand while she slipped in and out of morphine dreams, always asking the same question: "Are you cold, love?" She died at the start of summer. The sun was harsh that day, but Walter never felt warm again. After her funeral, he burned the documents, tossed the medals in a shoebox, cut up his bank cards, walked away from the house they had shared, as though someone had changed the locks on the meaning of home. He did not beg, he did not sue, he just vanished. The world called him crazy. But Walter Grady wasn't mad. He had simply run out of reasons to stay visible. He scavenged but never asked. He never reached for pity. He woke before dawn, rinsed his face with water from a city spigot, folded his blanket like he was still in barracks, and whispered only one thing to himself: "Roll call. Still here." One afternoon, a man offered him a handful of loose change. Walter didn't say a word. He placed the coins gently on a brick ledge and walked away. He used to live by honor, and even when the world stripped everything else, he never let that go. At night, he curled up next to a dumpster near an old strip mall. One of those places with more empty storefronts than dreams. The sodium lights buzzed above like broken promises. But there, in the shadows, he felt invisible enough to rest. The clinking of bottles in his cart was his lullaby, a sound not so different from bullet casings skittering across concrete. He'd heard both, survived both. He once held the lives of his brothers in arms. Now he could barely hold on to himself. He was a soldier who carried others through war. Now no one could carry his name through peace. But what the city didn't see, what the justice system would try to bury, was that Walter Grady wasn't done being a hero. He was just waiting for someone to remember that heroes don't always walk out of war unbroken. Sometimes they come home and sleep beside a dumpster until someone listens. The wind howled that night, sweeping through the skeletal rows of abandoned warehouses behind the shuttered strip mall. It didn't sound like weather. It sounded like someone grieving, long, low, and unwilling to be heard. Walter was pushing his cart back toward the corner he called safe, near an old charity outpost that hadn't opened in years. A place where cardboard was usually dry and nobody bothered you if you folded in early. He passed a giant commercial dumpster. Something in him, instinct, not curiosity, made him pause. Not because he expected anything good. Walter hadn't expected good in a long time. But some habits from war never left a man, like checking the ground before you step. A sound, not a can, not a rat. Something raspier, broken, nearly human. He stepped closer. Tucked beside the dumpster, beneath a row of rusting AC units, was a waterlogged cardboard box, sagging, kicked in on one side, barely holding shape. Walter bent down, peeled back the soggy lid, and froze. Inside, curled into a limp bundle of damp cloth and dust, was a little girl, no more than a year old. Her hair was matted, arms and legs a pale shade of purple, lips cracked, nose clogged. She didn't cry, only whimpered, as if the world had taught her already. Crying doesn't change a damn thing. She had no coat, no bag, no note, no name. Just left there, forgotten, like trash. Walter didn't hesitate. He stripped off his outer coat, the one that had been with him through 2 wars and 2 winters on the streets, and wrapped her inside it, snug and urgent. Then, with all the gentleness his calloused hands could gather, he lifted her to his chest, and he ran. No longer pushing the cart, no longer hiding from the world. Just a man carrying something too fragile to set down. He ducked through alleys, cut behind parking lots, and made his way to the back edge of the city cemetery, where a rusted carport and 3 other forgotten veterans lived out their days in silence. Beneath the corrugated tin roof, Walter cleared his spot. An old tarp, a frayed blanket, a few cans, a battered pot that once boiled rainwater. All that remained from the life of a man who used to wear a uniform and carry a country. He lit a fire from torn newspaper and broken construction scraps, barely enough to warm his hands. But it cast a faint glow onto the girl's face, pale, hollow, yet still here. He poured a few ounces of water into a tin cup, heated it, soaked a rag, and gently wiped her hands and feet, like she was made of glass, or memory. He laid her next to him, folded her into the crook of his arm, wrapped his other coat around them both, and formed a human shield against the night. Not too tight, but tight enough to stop the shivering. Then he stared into the dark, not looking, just remembering something too far back to name. She coughed, a small tearing sound that sliced through the quiet like a blade. Walter reached into his pocket. One last peppermint. He crushed it between his fingers, mixed it with a few drops of warm water, and touched it to her lips. They moved, just a little, but they moved, and for the first time in years, something new, something not cold, brushed against his chest, a breath. Small, barely there, but real. Walter held her closer, not just to keep her warm, but to remind himself, even a nameless child, left to die behind a shopping center, deserves to be held like she matters, like she belongs to this world. The next morning the sun rose slowly, as if unsure it should show up at all. Its light filtered faintly through a veil of winter fog that wrapped the city in a silence too heavy for its size. Walter hadn't slept. He sat with his back against the wall, arms wrapped protectively around the little girl. His old military coat cocooned the two of them like a fragile shell resisting the cold indifference of the world. But something was wrong. The girl's tiny body began to tremble, her skin paling to an eerie shade of gray-blue. Her lips darkened. Her breathing grew harsh, uneven. Walter pressed his palm to her forehead. It burned like fire, a fever, high, dangerous. Her pulse fluttered beneath his fingers like a bird too tired to fly. Her eyes didn't open. Her limbs curled inward with each weak gasp. A small body caught between staying and slipping away. For the first time in years, Walter panicked. He wrapped her in what blankets he had left, as if every thread could buy her another breath. Then he stood, Fast, unsteady, but driven. He didn't grab his cart, didn't look back. He just moved, fast. Every step stabbed into an old fear, the fear of losing someone he couldn't save. He had watched Margaret fade this way. He would not watch a child, nameless, weightless in the world's eyes, follow the same path. Walter crossed 3 blocks, turned onto a familiar street. There it was, the corner drugstore. A glowing sign above the door, serving our community 24/7. He entered without a word, walked straight to the counter. His hands open, revealing a crumpled handful of coins, scavenged from soda cans and kindness. He pointed, children's fever syrup, a pack of baby wipes, a bag of powdered formula, total under $20. In his hand, 12. The boy behind the counter looked him up and down. The glance wasn't cruel, just practiced, like someone flipping through a file they'd seen too many times. He said nothing, just pulled the items back behind the register and said flatly, "Not enough. Sorry, try somewhere else." Walter didn't argue, didn't plead. He stood there a moment, like he was memorizing every detail of those items, just in case it would be the last time he saw them. Then he turned and walked out. Night fell, colder than the one before. The moon barely made it through the clouds, and the shadows stretched long across the concrete like fingers that wanted something. Walter returned, not with anger, not with a plan, but with a decision. The back door of the pharmacy was secured with nothing more than a wooden latch. Walter eased it open. No bag, no mask, no gloves. He didn't hide his face, not because he wanted to be seen, but because hiding would have made this feel like a crime. It wasn't. Not to him. He didn't take money, didn't break anything. He moved carefully, almost reverently. Cough syrup, fever meds, a single bag of formula. His hands shook, not from fear of being caught, but from fear he was already too late. Before he left, he placed all $12 on the counter, everything he had, and then he disappeared into the night. A security camera caught part of him, just a figure in a hood, face obscured by glare, hands weathered and trembling with the weight of living too long in the cold. Back at the shelter, Walter moved quickly. Fire, warm water. He mixed the syrup, wiped her down with a soft rag, cleaned her brow like a priest performing quiet baptism. Then came the milk, spoon by spoon. He blew on each one, tested the warmth, fed her slowly, as if hope had to be measured in ounces. He never spoke, but his eyes, usually so distant, were full, not with tears but with pleading, not for forgiveness, but for mercy, for her to stay, just a little longer. She made a sound, a soft, broken moan, barely more than a breath. But then, her lips moved, not much, but enough. And that was all Walter needed. He exhaled, for the first time in hours. The shaking in his hands stopped. He pulled her closer, not just for warmth, but to remind himself that she was still here. And so was he. That night, Walter closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to give thanks. Yes, he had broken the law, but he had saved a life. Morning hadn't broken yet. Dew still clung to the edges of rusted tin, beating like tiny reminders that the night hadn't finished grieving. Walter sat quietly back against the wall, a faded towel draped gently over the girl's sleeping body. Less a blanket, more a prayer in cloth. Her breath had steadied. Her fever had dropped. The burning in her skin replaced by something more rhythmic, fragile, alive. He closed his eyes. Not to sleep, but to sit in stillness. The kind only men who've been to war understand. The kind that makes you respect the difference between peace and the pause before more pain. Then, a distant wail. Siren. A police SUV crawled past the cemetery fence, its tires crunching softly over gravel. Walter stayed still. He had no reason to run. He hadn't done anything wrong. But the man in the vehicle disagreed. The SUV slowed to a stop. The officer squinted at the shape under the carport. Gaunt figure, worn jacket, a shopping cart covered in tarp. Recognition flickered. He grabbed his radio. Dispatch, I've got visual on last night's suspect. Rear lot behind Park 6. Homeless encampment. Requesting backup. Click. The radio cut off. The door opened, and a man stepped out in a tactical vest and mirrored shades. He removed his glasses. A pale scar ran from the edge of his ear down into his collar. But the real mark of him was in his eyes. Mean, calculating, and very personal. Walter opened his eyes. He knew that face. Dale Wickham, former logistics squad. The same officer Walter had once testified against in a military tribunal for breaking a subordinate's ribs in a so-called training accident. Walter's words that day had been clear. He doesn't know how to control his anger, and he has a problem with black soldiers. Dale had lost his rank, was transferred out early, and clearly had never forgotten. Well, well, Dale said, stepping closer with a smirk, hand resting on his holster. If it isn't Trash Heap Grady, still breathing, huh? Walter didn't answer. He simply pulled the blanket up, shielding the little girl's forehead from the cold and from whatever was coming next. Dale leaned in. What's that in your arms? You smuggling product? Hot? Cold? Or just a cheap excuse to dodge another charge? Still, Walter said nothing, but he didn't flinch. And somehow, that set Dale off more than any insult could have. You cost me my stripes, he hissed, drawing his baton. Now I'm going to get that honor back, starting with those filthy, useless hands. No warning, no hesitation. Dale swung the baton hard, straight into Walter's shoulder. The crack was sharp, the pain immediate. Walter crumpled sideways, clutching the girl protectively. She screamed, a raw, terrified sound, the first real voice she had found since Walter rescued her from that box. But Dale didn't stop. Suspect resisting, possible weapon, engaging, he shouted into his radio, eyes gleaming. 2 more officers arrived seconds later. Walter was dragged from beneath the carport. The little girl clawed at his shirt, sobbing, her small hands gripping fabric, then air, face to the ground, knees in his back, elbows twisted behind. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped against his wrists like a verdict already written. You know how this ends, don't you, Grady? Dale sneered, lips nearly touching his ear. I'll write it so clean, so airtight, you won't see sunlight for the rest of your miserable life. The next day, the report landed on the district desk. Black male, homeless, suspected of burglarizing 2 pharmacies. Was seen carrying what appeared to be a weapon. Became violent during approach. Officers subdued him accordingly. No one asked what the weapon was. No one checked the unedited security footage. No one visited the shelter where he had begged for medicine. No one asked about the child. Walter was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and confined. Blood still crusted at the corner of his mouth. And the hands. The same hands that once carried wounded soldiers through mortar fire now locked behind him. Soiled not by guilt but by a lie, and a grudge no one had cared enough to fact-check. They brought him in through the back door, not out of respect, but to avoid the public eye. There was no lawyer waiting, no questions, no explanations, just a cold sequence of barked commands, like he was a malfunctioning object they needed to shut down. Take off your coat. Sit down. Hands forward. Not signing? Someone asked. Walter looked at them, not defiant, not submissive, just done. They scribbled non-compliant on the intake form and sent him to solitary. Cell 7 was tucked at the end of a hallway that light rarely reached. Concrete walls, low ceiling, a stale blend of mildew and disinfectant that clung to the air like regret. No windows, no clock. Just a broken surveillance camera in the corner and the hollow, uneven breathing of men long forgotten. Walter sat on a built-in bench, hands folded neatly in his lap, back straight against the wall, feet flat on the floor, like he was waiting for roll call that would never come. For 3 days he didn't speak, not one word, no questions, no protests. He didn't ask what time it was, didn't ask when it would end. He already knew. Words had failed to save his wife, and now they couldn't save him either. On the 4th morning, officers arrived at the makeshift shelter where Walter had been staying. They tore through everything, lifted his tarp, flipped over cardboard sheets, confiscated pots, blankets, a pair of worn-out shoes. They combed through every item like grief had fingerprints. But the girl, she was gone. No one documented her. No questions were asked, no missing person alert filed. Just a single note scrawled in the incident report. No additional persons found at the scene. The search team packed up and left, as if no tiny body had ever been curled beneath that plastic sheeting. As if she had never mattered, not even once. Back in cell 7, Walter sat still. Every time the door opened, he stood. A muscle memory from years of military protocol. Stand up, await orders, await questions, but none came. The guards walked in, looked, nodded, walked out. No one asked, "Are you okay?" No one wondered, "Is there someone we should be looking for?" And maybe the most painful truth wasn't that they didn't ask. It was that Walter didn't dare speak first, because he knew whatever came out of his mouth would be twisted into a reason to erase what little was left of him. So he said nothing. And in that silence, Walter slipped back into the only role this world had ever willingly written for him. Invisible, disposable, guilty until forgotten. In a modest office tucked away on the south side of Capitol Hill, where old case files stacked like bricks and the scent of stale newsprint clung to the air, a young woman was flipping through the latest batch of petitions from her community law team. Jasmine Crockett, congresswoman, attorney, and famously described by a colleague as the last troublemaker standing when justice goes quiet, had never passed over a case that smelled even faintly of injustice. But that morning, something slipped through the cracks. A man had appeared quietly at the front desk. Military jacket, worn-out boots, graying hair tucked behind his ears. He didn't ask to speak with anyone, didn't say his name. He simply handed the receptionist a folded piece of paper, creased with care, like it carried something fragile inside. "She needs to read this," he said softly. "I don't want to sign anything." The receptionist hesitated, but something in his eyes, some ache beyond pride or desperation, convinced her. She brought it in. Jasmine had just finished reading a dry municipal zoning appeal when the note landed on her desk. Light blue ink, slightly shaky handwriting. 2 lines, that's all. "Grady, Fallujah. Don't let them bury the man who once saved your father." She froze. Grady, Fallujah. That name, that place. It was like someone had cracked open a floodgate in her memory. When Jasmine was 10, her father, Henry Crockett, former Army medic, used to tell bedtime stories in their cramped kitchen. Her mother would peel apples while Jasmine worked through math homework. But whenever Iraq came up, especially Fallujah, he'd go quiet. One night, tipsy from half a glass too many, he sat staring at an old black and white photo on the wall and whispered, not to Jasmine, not even to his wife, but almost to himself, "I thought I was gonna die there. If it hadn't been for this black soldier who carried me 2 damn miles through gunfire, I wouldn't be here." He didn't say a word the whole way, just held me tight. My blood was all over his neck, and some of his was too. She never forgot that story, not because it was heroic, but because it taught her something about courage and about silence. Jasmine shot up from her chair. "Grady," she murmured and rushed to the archive drawer where the veteran service records were kept. It took less than 5 minutes. The files were digitized now. Name Walter L. Grady Unit, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines Commendation, Bronze Star, awarded for life-saving actions under live fire. Fallujah, November 18th, 2004, injured party saved. Staff Sergeant Henry Crockett, field medic. Her hand froze midair. The office seemed to shrink until all she could hear was the sound of her own breath. She rushed to the hallway, scanned it from end to end. But the man was gone. No name, no return address, no favor asked. Just a stranger who had believed, not truly, blindly, that goodness once found in war might still have power in peace, and he had been right. Jasmine returned to her desk, opened the criminal case file. There it was. Walter Grady, non-compliant, suspected theft, assault on officer, words written by people who had never carried another human through a battlefield. She placed her hand firmly on the folder. "He saved my father," she whispered. "Now it's my turn." If you've been listening up to this point, maybe your heart just skipped a beat too. Maybe you, like Jasmine, are remembering someone whose kindness once saved you. Someone the world forgot, but you never could. Maybe you're asking yourself, if goodness has no voice, will we be brave enough to speak for it? Just like she did. Courtroom 3, Santa Clara County Superior Court. Monday, 9:14 a.m. The neon lights buzzed faintly overhead. The wooden benches were cold, and the air smelled of old varnish and paper. The indictment was 7 pages long, barely, yet it described a man who had spent his entire life never asking for forgiveness just because he was poor. Walter Grady sat quietly in the defendant's seat. The orange prison uniform hung loosely from his gaunt frame, more like a borrowed accusation than a fit for justice. The top button of his collar was undone. His shoulders slumped, not from fear, but from too many years without the dignity of standing tall in a room that ever looked at him fairly. Across from him sat Judge Michael Carmichael. Silver hair slicked back, silver glasses perched on a nose that pointed downward more than forward. He didn't hate Walter. Hatred would have implied a sense of equality. To Carmichael, Walter wasn't a man. He was a file, another name buried in a stack of forgotten paper. The court has reviewed the materials submitted. Carmichael's voice rang out, crisp, deliberate, each syllable laid down like a verdict long rehearsed. However, we cannot accept a defense built on personal circumstances. He set his glasses down, looked directly at Walter. Being a veteran does not excuse criminal behavior, and poverty is not a license to steal. Walter said nothing. He didn't meet anyone's eyes, didn't scowl, didn't weep. He simply clasped his hands on his lap, slow, deliberate, the way a soldier might brace for shelling. Next to him, the court-appointed defense attorney, young, rumpled, more focused on his phone than his client, leaned over and whispered, "Just plead out. There's no upside to fighting this. With your military record, take the deal. Couple years, maybe a suspended sentence if we're lucky." Walter didn't reply. Once, a nod like that had saved lives. Now silence was the only thing he had left that hadn't been reduced to strategy. And this time, he chose not to nod, to preserve what little dignity the orange jumpsuit hadn't already stripped away. The evidence door swung open. Officer Dale Wickham entered, straightening his tie. The corner of his mouth curled into something smug. He took the stand. A grainy security video played, blurry footage, a vague silhouette smashing a window, a figure slipping behind a counter. No clear face, no timestamp, no visible object in hand. But Dale spoke with certainty. "That's him. Walter Grady." I recognized the posture, the movement. I was watching the feed in real time, apprehended him on the spot. He was holding an aggressive metal object stance, clearly posing a threat. No one asked why no weapon had been recovered. No one asked why an officer would act alone in a situation supposedly involving a violent suspect. No one asked to see the original, uncut footage. Judge Carmichael nodded, a small, curt motion that made the defense attorney shrink further into his seat. "Noted. Officer Wickham's statement is entered into record. No one stood for Walter, no family, no real defense. No witness to speak for him. Just one man in one chair buried beneath a stack of paperwork written in the language of indifference. The trial wasn't seeking truth, it was checking a box, justifying a stereotype. A black veteran, homeless, silent. Justice wasn't present that day, but at the back of the courtroom, last row by the wall, sat a young woman, gray coat, hair tied low, fingers gripped tightly around a weathered folder. Her name hadn't been called. Her turn hadn't come. But in Jasmine Crockett's eyes, there was fire, and Walter's silence was about to meet its voice. When the gavel becomes a blade, sometimes the only thing that can cut through the silence is someone brave enough to rise from the back row. Jasmine stood up, not hurried, not slow, but with a rhythm that made every step of her heels on the courtroom floor sound like a quiet drumbeat of defiance. Heads turned. She didn't wait to be called, didn't wait for permission. Her voice was calm, steady, not asking, just informing. "My name is Jasmine Crockett, member of the United States House of Representatives, licensed attorney in federal court, and I am requesting to assume legal representation for the defendant, Walter Grady, effective immediately. The room stirred. The court-appointed attorney exhaled and leaned back, almost relieved to leave the case behind. Judge Carmichael said nothing. He simply adjusted his glasses and gave a muted nod. Jasmine walked to the center of the courtroom. She opened the file in her hand, documents she had pored over all night, and then she began. "Your Honor," she said, each word carefully placed, "we are speaking about a man who served this country for more than 2 decades, who was deployed to Fallujah, Mosul, and Haditha, who was awarded the Bronze Star for carrying wounded comrades through a high-intensity mortar strike." She held up the certificate. Let the light hit it. Walter L. Grady, Bronze Star Medal, dated November 18th, 2004. Her voice didn't tremble, but the room did. The man sitting before you in an oversized orange jumpsuit like he's disposable once carried the weight of an entire war on his back so others could come home. She paused, then flipped to another document. This is the medical record of Margaret Grady, Walter's late wife. The VA hospital misdiagnosed her symptoms, ignored a clear CA 125 marker. When they finally admitted her, her ovarian cancer was already stage 4. No compensation, no apology, just a condolence letter. Walter didn't look up, but his fingers moved barely. Jasmine pressed on. This is the formal complaint Walter Grady filed in 2009 against Officer Dale Wickham for the physical assault of a junior soldier during active duty. It was dismissed. The sole witness? Walter Grady. She turned her eyes toward Dale Wickham, who now stood with arms crossed and no smile left. And now that same Dale Wickham is the lone witness, placing Mr. Grady at the scene, using a piece of video footage that contains no metadata, no timestamp, and no verifiable source. A ripple moved through the room. Jurors exchanged glances. Pens finally moved. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, but every syllable hit with quiet, unshakable force. I also submit the testimony of a volunteer at the City Outreach Center, who confirms that Mr. Grady requested fever medicine and warm towels for an unidentified child. He made no threats. He took nothing. He kept repeating, "She's burning up. I can't let her die in the cold." He left empty-handed. Jasmine closed the folder. Didn't need to look at the papers anymore. Your Honor, a hero doesn't need to shout his name. But justice must remember it. And in that instant, the entire courtroom went still. Not because everyone was convinced, but because for the first time, someone had asked a kinder question in a room full of cold accusations. A man who had been silent his whole life now had a voice. Not loud, not angry, but righteous. And that voice belonged to the daughter of the man he once carried through a war zone, now carrying him through the one he never asked for. No one was prepared for the footage. No courtroom had ever held its breath that tightly. Not until Jasmine inserted a USB drive into the projector and turned to face Judge Carmichael. Your Honor, she said evenly, we request to present the original, unedited security footage retrieved from the backup server of Walden's Pharmacy, the site of the alleged incident. The screen lit up. What had once been grainy, clipped, and incomplete now unfolded in full. No cuts, no voiceover, no edits. A man, tall, thin, walked into the pharmacy. No mask, no weapon, no urgency. He picked up cold medicine, formula, slowly, deliberately, like someone choosing items with the care of a father. Then, he placed a stack of crumpled bills on the counter, looked directly into the security camera, eyes calm, unflinching, and walked out, holding a small bag of supplies. The lighting was bright. There was no shattered glass, no property damage, and, most notably, no weapon. None of the objects described in the official complaint. A low murmur rose from the jury box. Carmichael tilted his head slightly, as if ready to interject. But Jasmine stood, her voice now forged in steel. Your Honor, the footage just shown is the original file, untouched, uncut. So I must ask, who submitted the altered version into evidence? She didn't wait for a reply. And why does the altered version match so precisely with Officer Dale Wickham's incident report? An officer with a documented pattern of misidentifying black suspects throughout his career, each time with insufficient evidence to prove misconduct. Her eyes locked on Dale. He tugged at his collar. Sweat began to bleed through his neatly pressed shirt. Jasmine continued, not rushing, but cutting with purpose. We also submit a disclosure of stock ownership from Horizon Group, the parent company of Walden's Pharmacy. The fourth largest shareholder is a man named Michael Carmichael. She held up the folder. 4.3% of company stock, held under a private trust in his name. The silence in the courtroom shifted. The eyebrows that once furrowed in skepticism were now lifted in stunned clarity. Jurors leaned toward each other. One of them, the eldest, nodded slowly, as if just realizing something he should have seen long ago. This courtroom wasn't protecting the truth. It was protecting its own. Carmichael adjusted his glasses. His lips pressed thin, and for the first time that day, his gaze dropped from Jasmine's. The court requires time to verify these claims, he stammered, but the sentence landed limp. And it was in that moment finally that Walter Grady raised his head, not to speak, just to look. A single glance, but one that carried the weight of 1,000 rebuttals. Because the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. 3 hours later, the court reconvened. Based on newly presented evidence, false testimony, and undisclosed conflicts of interest among court personnel, this court finds the defendant, Walter Grady, not guilty. The courtroom erupted, but Walter didn't rise. He simply closed his eyes, softly, gently, as if hearing once again the final breath of Margaret, except this time, it was his own breath, alive. The next morning, headlines swept through the city. Judge Carmichael recuses himself amid conflict of interest scandal. Officer Wickham under investigation for evidence tampering. No one knew where Walter Grady went after that. Only one legal clerk recalled, he exited through the back door, said nothing, but left behind a note. I don't need them to remember my name. I just need them to remember. I wasn't silent out of fear. He walked out of the county detention center wearing a clean white shirt, a navy knit sweater, and a pair of shine sneakers that didn't quite fit, but were clean. He carried nothing. No suitcase, no citation, no press release, just a single envelope, thin and neatly folded. Inside, a handwritten letter, firm but slightly trembling. Thank you for saving my father's life, and thank you for never stopping on your own. Jasmine Crockett. A few days later, someone spotted him at a veterans support center in Oakland, not asking for aid, not telling his story, just sitting beside men like him. Souls who'd gone quiet, swallowed whole by a system they once served. Now searching for the language to be whole again. Walter didn't talk much. He poured tea. Sometimes I placed a hand on someone's shoulder when the shaking got too hard to hide. Sometimes just nodded, as if to say, you don't have to explain. I'm still here. Soon people started calling him the man who keeps peace with his eyes. No one argued when he was in the room, and no one ever felt like the last one left. And the girl? She was found thanks to a shelter volunteer who recognized the old wool scarf Walter had used to wrap her up that night in the cold. She was taken in by the city's child services, then adopted by a single black mother. Jasmine Crockett signed as her legal guardian. At their first meeting, the girl didn't say anything. She simply walked up to Walter, took his hand, and curled into his arms like she'd been there before. Walter didn't speak. He ran his hand gently through her hair, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. Not because he was whole, but because the pain finally had a place to rest. In a quiet hallway at the Oakland Veterans Center, there's a wooden plaque. No spotlight, no ceremony, just one line carved in uneven letters. Some people stay silent not because they have nothing to say, but because no one has earned the right to hear them. And one day someone listened, someone wrote their name again, and someone finally made sure they'd never disappear again.